Okay, I did it. Yuchen, I am going to let you introduce yourself, and then we can just go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
Yeah, I see people are still logging in. Shall we wait for a
You
few
know,
minutes or?
I'm opposed to punishing the people who are on time. Just go ahead and start, and people will join as they join.
Um, oh, sure. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to this event. I'm Yuchen Yang, and I am currently an assistant professor at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So it's the evening for me. Um, So I've been told that this session is relatively informal, and the idea is that I will talk briefly about the kind of conceptual development of my recent paper, Gender Uptake, theorizing the semiotics of parentheses on doing gender, and then and also a little bit about the publication process. Um, and then I think we will leave much of the session for an open Q&A. Um, does that sound all right?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, leave lots of
Um,
time so people can ask questions.
yes, I'll try to leave a lot of time. Um, yeah, so I think just shall I get start now? It's more people showed up than I expected, so
It's great.
really,
We
yes,
advertised
yes.
widely, and everyone's very excited to hear about this. I had a lot of email traffic, so go for it.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. So, thanks again for having me here, and I'm very excited to share the backstory of this paper that really gets to the public. Um, so, since the theme for today's session is how to write theory, I think I'll also talk a bit more generally about my approach to theorizing and how I work with social theory. In my own work. So the my answer to that question is actually quite I think unusual in a sense that so some of you might know that my earlier work is hegemonic masculinities, kind of reformulating Raymond Connell's concept of hegemonic masculinity through a Gramscian lens. And in this current piece, I'm focusing on Western Zimmerman's theory of doing gender. So, as we know, doing gender is arguably one of the most famous article in feminist sociology. Um, for a sociologist, it is almost a folk concept or like a commonsensical resource. Um, for our kind of scholarly inquiry, right? There's it's very widely cited, and a lot of times it does appear as ritual citations, and oftentimes it was treated as a theory of gender performance. So what I was trying to do in that article is to kind of challenge this kind of um, equation or conflation of doing gender with performing gender. Um, and the reason that I started this project is that, as with my work on hegemonic masculinity, my approach to theorizing really comes out of my own sense of, some kind of inferiority complex as an international student and as a non-native speaker of English because English is not my first language. I've always had this kind of anxiety about how I'm, say, not understanding theory correctly. Like, um, since my first year of college, I'll constantly worrying that, well, this is very difficult, and I don't know how should I approach this. Whether I do think I have some grasp of it, but I don't know whether whether I am understanding the theory correctly. And with the uh, issue of hegemonic masculinity, that anxiety end up showing up on my title, right? It's literally called "What is hegemonic about hegemonic masculinity?" And then with doing gender, I think I first encountered doing gender in my first year of college, when I was ta taking the sociology of gender. elective. So I read Doing Gender and I kind of intuitively get the idea that, okay, gender is a performance. But on the one hand, I don't know like why they insist on using the word doing rather than performing if they are talking about gender performance. And then on the other hand, I just couldn't figure out what exactly does accountability means. Um, so I think in sociology of gender, a lot of times we kind of use this kind of we use the terms everyday meaning as responsibility, right? So when we think about the accountability of doing gender, a lot of times what we're thinking is that, say, we need to perform gender properly, like in accordance with gender norms. And if we deviate from these gender scripts, we will experience gender policing, and that's how accountability plays in. But when I first encountered doing gender and was reading it for my like sociology of gender class, I don't even know that accountability has the everyday meaning of responsibility, right? Because accountability is not part of the TOEFL SAT vocabulary, and I have no idea what that term means. And not to mention all those ethnomethodological connotation about, say, the observable and reportable quality of action or the capacity that any conducts can be described in an account. So I was very worried about I'm not understanding the theory correctly. And I think when I was in my second year, I started exploring more of my own, doing my own research, and I was doing a independent research project about gender crossing cosplay, which I ended up publishing in the Journal of Chinese Sociology like 8 years later. But when I was doing that project, I was also taking the interview method class with Kristen Luker, and I remember going to her office hour and asking, so what is the difference between doing gender and performing gender? So her answer was quite simple. She just said, when you read enough of feminist theory, you will be able to understand the difference. So that's what I did. As with my work on masculinity, um, my sense of anxiety drives me into the literature and kind of drives me into the history of sociology in some sense. So what I did was to kind of trace the conceptual development of these concepts, trying to figure out, since I do not know what these English words even mean, I figured I could look into these scholarly texts to figure out what was the context that they were being coined, how they came into being, and also how they developed over time. So I read a lot of feminist literature, but it's actually not in the sociology of gender or feminist sociology literature that I really learned the difference. Because, as I said, a lot of times we just take for granted that doing gender is a theory of performance. And because the theory is so well known and so widely used, we don't really question it, right? So we often assume this is something like we know each other know what doing gender means. And I even remember attending one of those professionalization workshops about academic publishing, where the a journal editor used doing gender as an example of how, like, if you are writing to, say, if you are writing for gender and society, you don't have to explain what doing gender means, right? So I appreciate that advice, but I also feel like it's through these kind of ritual citation that a lot of the insight got lost. And what I wanted to do is to try to trace the conceptual development of the theory from the more, say, original sources. So in my work on masculinity, it's about tracing them to um, how Connell's engagement with Marxist sociology and especially Gramsci's work on hegemony. And then in the case of doing gender, it's about really tracing the ethnomethodological lineage um, that West and Zimmerman were drawing upon, right? And I think one thing that I've always find intriguing about doing gender is that it's such a popular text. Almost all the sociology of gender class would assign this piece, or maybe also doing difference. But we always never read anything else that Weiss and Zimmerman had written, not to mention the broader ethnomethodological literature. And but if so, although we think of doing gender as a theory of gender performance, if we read into this ethnomethodological literature, the audience actually plays a quite critical role, right? For example, Garfinkel talks about the kind of documentary methods of interpretation, and Harvey Sachs talked about the viewer's maxim and hearer's maxim in his work on membership categorization, which also informed Weiss and Zimmerman's discussion of sex categorization. And then here, John Heritage also elaborated Garfinkel's idea of accounts and accounting, which Weiss and Zimmerman cited in their discussion of accountability. Um, so it is from these texts that I get the idea of turning the focus from the performer to the audience. I think the most kind of transformative moment comes during the pandemic, when all the research are on freeze and the only thing we could do is to read. And during that time, I remember like rereading Doing Gender for some reason, and then I came across this particular citation in their discussion of the Yuchen test of sex categorization, and the idea that like you do not need to check all the boxes to put someone into a sex category. And the citation was for a chapter Harvey Sachs wrote in 1972 titled On the Analyzability of Stories Told by Children, which is one of the two foundational pieces for membership categorization analysis in ethnomethodology. So by that time, I had developed a very strong interest in childhood studies. So the title also attracted me. So I ended up reading that chapter, and that chapter really blew my mind, because it was the whole chapter was based on two sentences at the beginning of a story told by a 2-year-old girl. And the two sentences are just the baby cried, the mommy picked up. And Sachs wrote 16 pages of analysis of the intelligibility of this account, like how we are able to hear the baby as the baby of the mommy, and how we are able to understand the sentence as the mommy picked the mommy picked her baby up because the baby cried. So that text profoundly changed how I think about what it means to do analysis, and also um, how we should approach the study of categories, right? Because usually when we think about qualitative analysis, we think in terms of coding, right? It's essentially about reducing a huge chunk of text into one code. But what Sachs showed is that analysis also involved data elaboration and paying attention to how people selectively invoke social categories in their formulation of accounts. So reading Sachs' work really helped me understand sex categorization in an ethnomethodological way, as opposed to, say, a social psychological way. And it's from there that I gradually started to understand what Garfinkel meant by accountability, and also the role social categories and accounts played in the production of social reality. So in the next few months, I spent a lot of time reading into this literature, but I don't have because I don't have anything else to do during the pandemic. And then I started using these ethnomethodological insights to rethink how I've been understanding doing gender. And it's at that particular point that I felt, although I've always been worrying that I'm not understanding the theory correctly because English is not my first language, maybe actually we are all missing something important when we reduce doing gender to a theory of performance. So I started thinking through the lens of ethnomethodology, and when the kind of research resumed in the later stages of the pandemic, I started thinking about my interview data, um, so I did interviews with feminist parents in the US, and I asked about how they kind of navigated the kind of shifting ideas about gender and sexuality, and in particularly how they navigated the very um, aggressively gendered landscape of childhood, right? How they curated their toys and clothing options. And many of them find it very puzzling that despite the kind of um, gender neutral parenting approaches that they took, or the kind of effort they put into challenging these gender stereotypes during child rearing, their children, their kids still somehow turn out to be very stereotypical, right? Their daughters might love Barbie's princess, um, and their sons might just love Nerf guns or trucks. Um, so they find it very puzzling, right? And then from a mythological perspective, that's almost like a naturally occurring breaching experiment, right? They have this belief that gender is something we learn, something that can be changed if we socialize children differently. But then they have this observation that really challenges that kind of belief. So this provided an opportunity to look into the kind of meaning-making practices of how they have transformed or maintained their existing knowledge about gender. So I look into the kind of accounts they used to make sense of their kids' gender stereotypical interests and the way they um, invoked membership, different kinds of membership categories to anchor the intelligibility of their children's interest. So that's how I kind of leverage those ethnomethodological insight into my empirical work and kind of using that as a point to rethink what it means to like the kind of uh, processes of doing gender from the audience, the from the audience perspective, right? If we think of the children as performing gender by, say, playing with Barbie dolls or playing gunfights with Nerf guns, then their parents would be their primary audience in a lot of times, right? So it's about looking at the process of doing gender from the audience rather than the performer's perspective. And then once I've collected these data and started thinking about the through a methodological lens, ethnomethodological lens, I started I would occasionally have these kind of conversations with my spouse, who is a linguistic anthropologist. So she had been um, struggling to work with these very Persian concepts about, like, say, icon, index, symbols, quality sign, sin sign, ledger sign, whatever, right? So initially, I was a bit resistant into digging into that literature because there is a lot of jargons and it sounds very, very complicated. But after having these conversations with my spouse, I was told that my thinking on the use of membership categories, the kind of selectivity of categorical account, really resonated with how linguistic anthropologists are using these kind of Persian um, concepts to analyze how people use signs to make meaning out of the world they observe, right? So if your daughter likes, say, Barbie dolls, what is that a sign of? And what does it signify, right? So at that moment, I started realizing, well, maybe I do need to read more into the Persian semiotics, which is actually uh, getting some more and more attention in sociology, especially cultural sociology, with the kind of pragmatist revival. So I started by reading Timmermans and Tavri's work on racist encounter, which was published in the same issue as my masculinity article, and I got hooked. Right, what I thought was these very abstract or complicated jargons turned out to be a very precise analytical language for unpacking how people make meanings and how people use signs to make meanings. So I started learning more about semiotics, and I also read Susan Gell and Judith Irvine's book on Science of Difference. And because I was at Chicago, um, I ended up taking Sue Gell's class and get inviting her onto my committee as well. So that really transformed how I was thinking about um, doing gender, right? It's now that it's not just as a methodology, but also bringing a focus to meaning making. And in a way, I think that is also very compatible with that methodology if we understand methodology literally as the method people use to produce an order in the world, right? We as sociologists have our method, like interviews, regressions, like quantitative analysis, surveys. We use these this method to produce an order, right? Say man, woman are different in say their pays or in their salaries, things like this. But members of lay people also have their own method for producing social order, right? They have this um, method to make sense of the difference they observe. And on the one hand, ethnomethodology is about the study of this method. And then on the other hand, Persian semiotics really helps us analyze the meaning making processes of how they are making making sense of the things they observe. So it's through this kind of accidental discovery of uh, interrelated or adjacent fields that are rarely in conversation with each other that I came to uh, develop a more kind of pragmatist approach or re-articulation of doing gender from the audience perspective. Um, I feel like I've been saying a lot. Shall we stop for a moment and take a few questions? Um,
This is your chance, everybody, to ask Yuchen anything you want about writing theory. Step up and ask those questions.
I actually do have a question. First of all, thank you for doing this presentation. My name is Tyler Rodney. I'm from UNLV. What was you said the guy's name was Harvey Sachs? Like, what's the article for that? Because I'm curious to read that.
Yes, it's Harvey Sachs, and the article is on the analyzability of stories told by children. So I think it's a book chapter. So Harvey Sachs is the founding father of conversation analysis, as well as membership categorization analysis. Um, but unfortunately, as a discipline, we don't read that much conversation analysis. Um, So what I find exciting about his work is that he has this very radical view of how people use categories and how people produce social order that I find very inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see a question.
Yeah, Yuchen, can you take the one from the chat?
Yes. So the question is, one point I made, you collected your data from the feminist parents that have mentioned that some young girls chose to play with Barbie dolls and boys choose to play with something else. Uh, how uh, how the interplay between private and public sphere, since children's lives are not confined to family, but they are constantly exposed to outside environment. Yeah, that's a very great question, right? Because when looking at these kind of explanations, I think one comment I always get when I talk to my sociology colleagues about what I'm studying is that sometimes they would just reply by saying, "Oh, it's because it's their kids, it's their friends," right? So children do get these kind of influences from their peers, but that is a sociological account. And like it's another story like during the pandemic when everyone is at home, where do they got these influence from? But the I think one thing that I am interested in is how are my respondents explaining these observations? And actually, some of them do appeal to these external sources of influences. And actually, because our knowledge circulates beyond the academia, the idea that gender is a performance is just so popular right now that some of my respondents would literally describe their children's interest as a performance. But then, if they are understanding that as a performance, what does it mean for the accomplishment of gender, right? Like in back in Goffman's days, he talked about this kind of doctrine of natural expression where we see something that and then we appeal to nature to account for where it's coming from. But now we are seeing these what I call social determinants account, where people are appealing to these external sources, appealing to society, societal influences. So I think this is actually a moment where we see the reflexivity of social theory, right? It's a moment where uh, people are drawing on these sociological explanations to make sense of the world. And if we are interested in people's meaning-making processes, we should take that into account. And I would argue that that also provided a different way of doing gender or a way to redo gender, where the ground of naturalization is no longer biology, but sociology. It's actually one of those accounts that didn't end up getting into the social theory version of this article, but it's something that I will write more in the book. I see Neil has a hand up. Hi.
Yuchen, thank you so much. Really enjoyed reading the article, and now, yeah, I'm also excited to go read this Sachs piece. A sort of meta question. I'm curious how you think about, this idea of writing theory. We make this split between theory, empirics, methods. Writing for sociological theory, or maybe this piece in general, how did that shift for you to think, or do you think of yourself as doing sociological theory versus, right? You could have also imagined this paper front loading the empirical stuff and it being that way. So just curious how it changes how you write and think, if you're deciding like I'm doing theory right now versus I'm doing
Mm,
empirical sociology. Thank you.
yes. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, right? And actually, this piece was initially written for another journal, but it got rejected after two R&R. Like if you are a feminist sociologist, you can very easily guess the reason for rejection because it's not appealing to a general sociology audience, and it should go to say gender and society. Um, but I think I tend to think in a more theoretical way, and I've been thinking if I were to write this for a more empirical journal, I would still like emphasize the theory part up front. But also, it's tricky because we have very few outlet for pure theory, right? Um, Even like before the coup, theory and society was also only accepting empirical papers for some period, and now sociological theory is the only outlet that publishes pure theory pieces. And when I was turning this piece into pure theory, that not into social theory, the major change is to reduce the number of empirics, right? I need to frame it as a theory-heavy piece where the empirics is just for illustration. Whereas I think for writing for a more generalist or a more empiricist journal, there is more focus on um, highlighting the data. Like I would get complaints about the front end being super long, and it takes like 16, 18 pages to get to the case. Um, and then in terms, but for me, I feel more comfortable writing in this genre because it also provides kind of an alternative to how we present qualitative data. Precisely because it's a theory journal that where kind of empirical data points are for illustrative purposes, we can really go into the depth of qualitative data and not sacrifice depth for breadth, right? And I think for some of the generalist journals, a lot of times we feel this pressure of turning our data into percentages, kind of reduce the richness by reporting frequencies, and or trying to cover all the kind of empirical patterns that we identify and trying to be inclusive of every major topics. But in doing that, we also lose focus. And for me, I don't think that's the most effective way of making a theoretical contribution, even though all those journals claims to be wanting a theoretical contribution. So I actually prefer the kind of sociological theory style in the sense of allowing me to write qualitative data in a more with more sensitivity to the depth and richness of a fewer data points than trying to cover everything. Hope that answered your question. Uh, I think there's a question in the chat first, and then now I'll take the question in the chat first. What were your challenges in choosing the method while writing this article? By method, do you mean the method of uh, writing theory or the method of analyzing empirical data or like say interview as the method. Oh, method of writing theory. So in general, my approach to writing theory, as I said, a lot of my work in social theory comes out of my anxiety as a English learner, right? So it's about clarifying, taking a concept and tracing its historical lineage and clarifying what exactly do we mean by this particular concept. So when I write theory, a lot of time it takes it's more like writing an exegesis of a concept than say taking a few concepts from here and then taking a few concepts from there and like mixing them up. Um, so that's my general approach to theoretical work. And I do think there are problems with that, and especially sometimes it does feel like mansplaining, especially, and that can get especially tricky because I work in feminist sociology, right? And certainly do not want mansplain feminist concepts. Uh, but at the same time, I also feel like by tracing these historical lineage, there is something new that we can learn. And by turning attention to these neglected insight, so in doing gender's case, it would be the selectivity of membership categorization, or in the case of hegemonic masculinity, it's about the kind of combination of force and consent, right? Turning attention to these aspects of theory, we can really see new things in our data. And for me, that is the method I prefer to use in terms of developing theories. Hope that answered your question. Nabila?
No,
Can you hear me?
yep,
Yes.
I can.
Okay. Hi, Yuchen. First of all, thank you for doing this at 8:30 p.m. your time, which is also my time. So hopefully this will make sense. Uh, and I'm sorry if this is, like I'm very new to writing theory. So, um, is there, one of the things that strikes me is that, you wrote this amazing paper, and then one of the other theoretical things that you're thinking about, which sounds wonderful, and I would love to read your next data, didn't make it into this paper, and you're writing something about it. Um, I think that's something that does that pose a problem for you in that you have all this data and you have this all this data, but it is a limited one set of data, and then you could write potentially a few different theory papers about it. You might even use the same vignette in two different papers to illustrate two different kinds of things. Do you need to worry about that in the publication process, that this is the same data you've used somewhere else? Um, I apologize if that question doesn't make sense, but this is just something I'm also coming up against and would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's actually a very important question, especially because this project was based on my doctoral dissertation. And obviously, for qualitative dissertations, we're often thinking about turning them into books, and then there is this kind of competition between paper versus book, right? Sometimes when you publish too many papers, the press might want you to write something completely different for the book because otherwise people will just read the paper version, which is shorter and cheaper than actually reading the book. And that's actually another place where I thought writing theory, especially writing the version for sociological theory, um, works better for my career, for my purpose, is that it allows me to focus on a theoretical development, uh, developing a theoretical framework that I will also be using in the book, and just highlight a few, like two case studies that I discuss in the book as well, but present them almost like a trailer, right? Kind of giving people a sense of what I am working on and how the kind of theory I develop is relevant for analyzing empirical data and how it can provide new insights for analyzing empirical data. And then the book would be the space where all those other um, types of data or all the other kind of accounts I analyze uh, get to like tell those stories, right? That's the place where I can present the more empirical parts of my work. So I think there is also a kind of division of labor in terms of publishing.
Thank you so much. That's
Um,
really helpful.
Thanks for the question. And I see a question in the chat on if you can share some reflections on how you approach the difference between drawing on existing theoretical perspective and doing your own theory in writing your analysis uh, process. Was this something you were thinking about when writing? Yeah, so I think with qualitative research, a lot of times people use the grounded theory approach to develop a theory from ground up, right? But um, for me, because I studied social theory with Michael Broadway when I was doing my undergrad at Berkeley, I was heavily influenced by the extended case method approach. Um, I tend to think more in terms of existing theories, like we start from, with our favorite theory and kind of trying to reconstruct those theories. So in general, I tend to lean toward building on existing theories than developing something out of scratch. But then even when, and this is something that I've been thinking recently, is that even when working in the extended case method tradition, a lot of times the kind of theory I work with are not intended for extended theory, extended case method, right? Like for Michael Broadway, a lot of the Marxist theories they are predictive theories, right? They help you make a prediction about some empirical phenomenon, and by finding some deviant case, you can reconstruct those theories to make a better prediction. But in my case, a lot of theories that I am interested in, say, methodology, symbolic interactionism, and Persian semiotics, they are not that predictive. And then the question becomes, how am I going to reconstruct these theories? I don't think I have a concrete answer to that yet, but my current approach is to think through how the different ways we can interpret these theories and how by interpreting these theories in different lights, we can also illuminate different aspects of the empirical world, right? Especially if we follow Broadway's metaphor of theory as a lens, and like without theory we are blind, then kind of calibrating the theory to different angles or different dimensions, we may also bring to light different aspects of the empirical reality and help us understand them in different way. So that's how I am currently approaching it.
Yuchen, would you, you know, that everybody's paper is rejected sometimes many times. I think my record is 15 or something, you know, is a dirty little secret that, you know, we don't share. 'Cause then it just sits in our CV and it looks like, you know,
Mhm.
miracles occur or something. And, you know, you won the JTS prize on this. And but it was rejected right from previous journal. And this has happened to me also, you know, several times where you know, it gets rejected and then you know it gets some recognition in some way. So could you would you mind speaking to that rejection process and sort of you know how you dealt with it? I think that we all do that, and I think it's good to
Mhm.
speak publicly about it if you don't mind.
Yeah, so in my case, it's actually a bit extreme because so the paper was rejected after two RNRs, two revised and resubmission at American Sociological Review. And during the revision process, so in the first round, so I got three reviewers in the first round, and um, they the first round of review were generally pretty positive. It's more about like you need to cite these work, and then I think the drama really happens during the first revision when a very senior scholar really wanted me to cite a particular one of his recent book that he just published. And it's very obvious it's him because like his reviews in the later rounds contained very specific block quotes from his own book. Um, so initially I was kind of critical of the book because like if you like he was asking me to show how my approach is different and why I'm taking the approach I'm taking, right? So I do need to make some critiques, but then it seems that those critiques somewhat offended him, and he was asking me to show like how my work, say, intelligibly add on to, build upon, or absolutely surpass his book. Um, so it was a very dramatic process in terms of navigating this particular reviewers, and then like ASR was changing editors. So in the end, it didn't work out. The whole process was extremely extenuating, extremely exhausting for me mentally as well. But I think I was fortunate to have a very supportive committee and also friends and colleagues that helped me believe that I am doing something important. I remember one of my community members told me that I have like saying something like they have some fingers to show when they heard about the whole drama. So having these kind of community of friends, colleagues, and mentors, I think really helped me kind of survive this whole process, right? I my first draft was completed in the end of 2022, so it took me 3 years to get this paper published, and it's a very, very long process and very emotionally draining process. And unfortunately, especially for gender scholars, feminist theorists, and queer scholars, and also scholars of color, these kind of things do happen more common. And I think when I was the student rep for sex and gender section, sorry for plugging that in, but we did a survey of our student members to look at how frequently they got told that their work is not sociology, or that they are kind of rejected because they didn't appeal to a general sociology audience. And it is very ironic that although sex and gender is one of the largest subfield of the discipline, um, the there is still the sense that the field is too niche to be sociological. And I think we need to think about collective ways to make our discipline more inclusionary, more inclusive for these feminist scholarship, for queer scholarship, and for scholarship from scholars of color, right? So I think it feels very alienating when you are in this process, but it's important to build these communities, I think.
Yeah, are there other questions? Here's your moment, everybody, to ask everything you wanted about writing theory. Yuchen, could I also ask you to, if you don't mind, could you reflect on like your writing process, like, you
Mm,
know, uh, part of it is just like for all of us, it's just how we get everything done every day. We
right.
teach and research and we have service and, we get all these requests every day. So part of it is just like, how do you get this done? And people have different ways. Like some people like to block out days and some people
Mm,
like to block out hours and some people have you know, I have to write a page every day, so they have a concrete goal. Could you talk a little bit about just your writing process, like, how you get things
right.
done and like how you carve out writing time?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I think this paper spans over grad school and my current job. So my writing approach is a bit different. Obviously, when I was in grad school, I have much more time to just focus on writing. But now that I'm also teaching and also supervising students, it and having these departmental responsibilities, it's harder to find time to write. So what I do is I usually block out 2 days. I block out 3 days on my calendar, but one day never worked. So I try to make sure I have 2 days that I can spend on writing, and it's always going to have some intrusion, but especially now that we are in the midterm here in the UK and the marking is taking a lot of time. So there are compromises that I have to make, but I do think blocking out some time really works. Especially, I tend to feel like I'm more efficient when I have large chunks of time to concentrate on thinking and writing. Um, and I'm not particularly good at using this kind of fragmented piece of time. But then I think in writing, I'm actually still using one technique I learned when I was in college when one of the professors shared that piece of advice, and it's something I would like to pass down, is that I always make sure I have multiple documents open, and I always keep a bang file or a deleted file where I put all the kind of sentences that I cut out so that have I make sure I don't delete something that's actually well written, but I hate it at the time. And when I need to find something, I could search my Bing document. So I would write it in one Bing document, and if I don't like something, I would cut it out into the deleted file, and then if things work out, and then bring it back. So kind of going back and through with different approaches. And then I think the other thing about academic writing more generally is that like although this particular article is really really long, and I'm very grateful that many of you take the time to read that article, but in general I think I learned to write most efficiently by learning to work with word counts and um, trying to keep my words under the word count. So a lot of times, although the first draft might be very long, um, during the revision process, in order to get it under a word count, I would try to cut out a lot of unimportant words or like remove phrasal verbs and just focus on the more important things. Maybe combine sentences or try to simplify things a little bit. And it's this kind of revision process of working with a stricter word count that I come to realize what are the important parts of a theory paper. And actually, I learned that through a theory course with Michael Broadway, where we had, like, I remember our first midterm for our first theory class, like Marxist theory, is to explain Marx's theory of history in like 750 words. It's a very strict word limit, but it is possible. And when we are able to do that, it really helps us think through the theory also more clearly. And so I think, in my view, writing theory and theorization is actually difficult to separate because like writing itself is a form of thinking, and it's by improve our writing that we make our theory better. Oh, I see there is a question. Writing process, well, in grad school, especially how we manage balancing writing, publishing, and collecting data. Okay, yeah. So I think when I was in grad school, like for grad school student, there is always this pressure to publish. So I always think like when you have some ideas, it's better to start writing. And I think for me, I got the advantage of like during the pandemic, there was this period of time that I could really concentrate on writing. But then um, I think during grad school, it's also important to think about a timeline, a trajectory of the different articles that you want to publish, right? You don't want like publication is important, but you also don't want to publish too many things that leave you nothing when you got a job and have less time to write new things. So I think this kind of planning is important, and I think writing theory for me is a way of getting, especially in grad school, it's a way of getting a clear sense of my ideas. And then writing a more empirical article would be a different mode of thinking. So I think kind of trying to balance between how much work I put on the theory side and how much work I put on the empirical side is a very important thing to consider. And also, they might involve different sets of writing skills. Um, so, in my theory writing, I tend to like write in a more, say, sophisticated or complicated way. Whereas in my empirical writing, I try to be more ethnographic or to be more descriptive. So they involve different kind of mental activity, and I sometimes feel being able to go back and forth is also quite fun and quite an interesting activity to try with different modes of writing. I hope that answered the question. How did you decide that this concept had enough explanatory power to be introduced as a new theoretical contribution? Um, yeah, that's also a very good question. And for me, the concept I work with, um, they are already very popular, right? Um, Hegemonic masculinity is probably the single most important concept in masculinity studies, and also um, doing gender, as I said, is the most influential piece in feminist sociology. So I think these are important concepts because people are using it and they are using it very widely. And the problem is that when people use these concepts, a lot of times they use it as ritual citation or they take it out of the original intellectual lineage. So I think my intervention is to kind of recover this kind of lineage, to bring in those kind of neglected insights, say from ethnomethodology or from, say, Antonio Gramsci, to use those insights to provide us a new way of looking at a phenomenon that we already know as important. So for me, that's the value of standing on the shoulder of giants, right? That's also the value of working with the extended case method. And I think when you work with grounded theory, it takes more time to justify why the concept the concept you developed is important. And like given that we are all trying to develop some sort of concept, but when working in the extended case method approach, we are standing on the shoulder of giants and we are building on um, theoretical debates that are already having, and by resituating these debates into the intellectual lineage of this concept, we can bring in new angles to a phenomenon that all, say, feminist sociologists would be interested in. The reviewing process from submission to acceptance. So for sociological theory, in both of my cases, I think the review process went very smoothly and very fast. Um, I got two, in both cases, in the first round, I got two reviews. Um, for this particular um, article, the one on doing gender, one reviewer was more positive and the other was a bit more dismissive. Um, and I could tell it's from an ethnomethodologist because ethnomethodologists tend to be super harsh with each other. That's something I learned working for the American Journal of Sociology. Um, Usually their comments is always like Harvey Sachs and Manny Shackloff have already written about this 30 years ago. uh, they just keep kind of pushing each other, and which is why we see so little ethnomethodological work in these top mainstream journals. Um, but I think that for me, in sociological theory, the editor wrote the most helpful decision letter that I've ever seen um, in the past few years. Like it provided very um, detailed suggestions about how I could approach the reviewer's critiques and how some kind of additional things that I could think about. And I think the editors are also very clear that some of the comments are more related to their interest, and it's fine if I don't have to engage with them in that way. So I think that is also a very important thing with good reviews and good kind of decision letters is ultimately It's about helping the author making the best argument that they want to make rather than forcing them into making your argument or like forcing them to cite your book as that um, senior white scholar did to me. And I think so for me, sociological theory is a terrific space to have those kind of like I learned a lot through the review process. And uh, in my first article, that was also my first publication. So uh, the first time I publishing social theory was also like my first publication, and working through that review process also taught me a lot about how to do reviews. Um, and how to be a supportive reviewer. And that's something I continue to do as I review articles. So the short answer to your question is the review process at sociological theory is extremely professional and extremely constructive. And the reviewer do give very good comments on the paper.
Yuchen, one time I was at a talk by a very senior person, and he said a writer is a rewriter, and I rewrite everything like hundreds of times. What
Mhm.
how much do you rewrite? I think there's a myth that another dirty secret or whatever, that these things just like fall out of our heads perfectly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so this paper, the version that got accepted was the version 14 of this article. As I said, it took me 3 years to publish this piece, and like the drama with the rejection also created a number of unnecessary revisions. Um, so I think um, in general, I don't particularly like making revisions, especially big revisions that I have to like say engage a whole bunch of literature or things like that. But I always find revisions helpful. And so one thing, and I think this goes to one of the earlier question, is that one thing I love doing in the writing process is like I like writing one draft and then putting it in one Word file and then open a new Word file just to copy things. Like I type them new. I don't just Control C, Control V, but I type things into the new document while looking at the old version and then make revision as I type. Um, and this feels particularly good because it feels like I'm making progress, right? Maybe I write 3 or 4 paragraphs a day, even though a third of them or half of them are the same as the previous version. But it makes me feel more productive. And also in writing, uh, retyping my manuscript, I also came to notice, say, some particular grammatical errors or places where I could have articulated an idea more concisely and things like that. So I think going back to the writing, I do think this kind of revision is very helpful. And then sometimes like I do present on workshops and circulate my papers and would get all sorts of comments. And I think those kind of revisions is more tricky because like people have their own ideas and people are coming from different backgrounds and they have different way of framing this paper. And in that case, it's more important to have your own sense of what you want to do in this paper and what you want to achieve, and knowing what kind of revision is necessary and what kind of revision is probably maybe something you could say for a different paper or something that is just not that important. So being able to judge the value of different comments, I think is also a very important skill to have.
Yu Chen, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And thanks everybody for all of your questions and comments. Let's give Yu Chen a round of applause. Hands going up.
Thank you so much
You
for
very
having
much.
me
And
today.
yeah, and I just wanted to comment that this is a ASA theory section talk, and these sections entail a lot of labor behind the scenes. So please, we have a membership drive going on. join the theory section. And when you renew, make sure to check that little box for theory. And thank you again. And we'll, yeah, we're going to put this up online on the theory section.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and hope
Yes,
you have
follow
a
us
great.
on Blue Sky. Thank you so much. Yeah, our Blue Sky address is in the chat, and we're trying to build that out too. So please um, add that to your account and repost our notices for us. You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, Yuchen, thanks again. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to stop this recording.